So, a word of introduction. We're going to have a discussion. So there's going to be a participation part again. I know there's a lot of pressure if you come to second day of Rosh Hashanah, I guess. You have to rush the bima and participate in discussion. But it'll be more interesting if you do participate. And so as with our discussion for Erev Rosh Hashanah, this discussion is, this text first that we'll read is meant as a prompt for a larger question of the nature of friendship. So just a little background. This is from 1 Samuel, one of the books that we will be studying if you join me for that monthly class, that introduction to the history books of the Bible, beginning the first Monday night in November and meeting on a monthly basis and covering a different book throughout the year. So 1 Samuel tells the story. It goes a little bit into 2 Samuel. It tells the story of the early kings, but in particular here we're talking about the early life of King David, the most famous of our kings. You know, David, right, everybody knows that. Okay, I'm not going to do much singing tonight, this morning. So King David, here we go. He, by the way, I'm just going to kind of frame a little bit what happened first. He's, I don't know how to put this, a young upstart who kind of wants the king's job and is vying for the king's job. He's not a son of King Saul, who is the king at this time. He, of course, kills Goliath. Everybody knows that story, right? The giant, is felled by a slingshot. And so that is part of, he's, gaining prowess in terms of his military might and military successes. And as you'll see, what we're reading here, Saul is becoming increasingly, agitated by this young guy who seems to want his job. And so that's a little bit of the background. This happens approximately, King David lived approximately 1000 BCE, just, give or take 100 years. I'm just kidding. So just approximately 3,000 years ago is when we date King David. So this is, and I've edited this from several chapters of 1 Samuel so that we can kind of get a flavor of the story and a little bit of the background. You're welcome if you follow that link that I sent out along with the email in terms of preparing for this Rosh Hashanah service. You can follow the link in Sefaria to all of the chapters here. But this is just a little background. So when David finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan's soul became bound up with his soul of David. And Jonathan loved David as himself. So sorry, I forgot to tell that part. Jonathan's one of Saul's sons, and so he and David are developing this friendship, and that's really the more significant part in terms of our discussion. What is the measure of friendship, and what is what do we know? How do we know who a true friend is, and what defines true friendship? And so this is just the Bible's example of that, I think, and that's why we're going to use this as our jumping off point. So their souls became bound up with each other, and Saul took him into his service that day and would not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan and David made a pact because Jonathan loved him as himself. And Jonathan took off the cloak and tunic he was wearing and gave them to David, together with his sword, his bow, and his belt. And David went out. So in other words, Jonathan's like seeing him as a brother, and he's taking him into the family. And David went out with the troops, and he was successful in every mission on which Saul sent him. And Saul put him in command of all the soldiers. And this pleased all the troops and Saul's courtiers as well. He was a very popular general. Let's just summarize it in that way. And when the troops came home and David returned from killing the Philistine, the women of all the towns of Israel came out singing and dancing to King Saul with timbrels, shouting, and sistrums. And the women sang as they danced, and they chanted, "Saul has slain his 1,000, David his tens of thousands." Saul was much distressed. It's kind of a typical king. Saul was much distressed and greatly vexed about the matter, for he said, "To David they have given tens of thousands, and to me they have given thousands. All that he lacks is the kingship." Right? He really wants my job, this guy. And from that day on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. And the next day, an evil spirit of God gripped Saul, and he began to rave in the house while David was playing the lyre. He's also, of course, not just a great general, but a talented musician who wrote 150 psalms, according to tradition. So while he's fighting the Philistines, he's just composing poetry and singing. Okay, it might be a stretch, but nonetheless, he's playing, and he's just sitting there enjoying himself, and you could see Saul's getting riled up. Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, thinking to pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him and had turned away from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and appointed him chief of 1,000 to march at the head of the troops. And David was, you got to go in front of the army, David. He's hoping he doesn't come home from the battle, obviously. But David was successful in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he was successful, he dreaded him. All Israel and Judah loved David, for he marched at their head. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. In return, you be my warrior and fight the battles of the Lord." Saul thought, Let not my hand strike him. Let the hand of the Philistines strike him. It's a little, sort of. A lot of the, kings and rulers have behaved this way for thousands of years would be one lesson of the Bible. So you get the sort of context. So David and Jonathan are best of friends. Jonathan treats him as his brother, brings him into the house, and David is just successful at whatever he does. And Saul is getting increasingly jealous of David and even tries to kill him, apparently, while they're just hanging out in the palace. And when Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that Michal, daughter, we've skipped a little bit, hence the 3 dots, and that Michal, daughter of Saul, loved him, Saul grew still more afraid of David. And Saul was David's enemy ever after. There's some episodes where David's actually hiding from Saul. And according to tradition, some of the Psalms were written when he was hiding. And the Philistine chiefs marched out to battle, and every time they marched out, David was more successful than all the other officers of Saul. His reputation soared. Saul urged his son Jonathan and all his courtiers to kill David. But, and here comes the part about friendship, but Saul's son Jonathan was very fond of David. And Jonathan told David, "My father Saul is bent on killing you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Get to a secret place and remain in hiding. I will go out and stand next to my father in the field where you will be, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I will tell you." So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul, and he said to him, "Let not your majesty wrong his servant David, for he has not wronged you. Indeed, all his actions have been very much to your advantage. He took his life in his hands and killed the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then should you incur the guilt of shedding the blood of an innocent man and killing David without cause?" Saul heeded Jonathan's plea, and Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." But Jonathan called David and Saul, and Jonathan told him all this. Then Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as before. And fighting broke out again, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He inflicted a great defeat upon them, and they fled before him. And then an evil spirit of the Lord came upon Saul while he was sitting in his house with a spear in his hand, and David was again playing the lyre. And Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he drove the spear into the wall, and David fled and got away. And now we skip a number of episodes, and now we're going to come across where Saul's had it. He really wants to do away with David. David fled from Naoth and Ramah, and he came to Jonathan and said, "What have I done? What is my crime and my guilt against your father that he seeks my life?" And he replied, "Heaven forbid, you shall not die. My father does not do anything great or small without disclosing it to me. Why should my father conceal this matter from me? It cannot be." And David swore further, "Your father knows well that you are fond of me and has decided Jonathan must not learn of this, or he will be grieved. So the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death. And Jonathan said to David, whatever you want, I will do for you. And they then create, and I just have to tell this story because it was too long in the Bible. They basically create a pact where Jonathan's going to reveal, sort of Saul's plan in a secret way so that David knows and can escape. And then, eventually, this we've skipped way ahead. Jonathan is killed in battle, and David, who is now king, says, I grieve for you, my brother Jonathan. You are most dear to me. Your love was wonderful to me, more than the love of women. And so, that's the basic story, edited and abbreviated somewhat. And the basic story is that David and Jonathan are friends, and Jonathan goes to extraordinary ends, subverting the will of his own father, conspiring, if you will, with David against his father for the sake of his friendship and his love for David. That is the basic, narrative line of this story. The lengths that Jonathan will go for his friend over and against his very own father and the king. And so those are two kind of categories, right? Going against the ruler and going against your own father for the sake of friendship. So that is the setup for the question about friendship. Now, I realize none of us have ever been in this situation, sort of a life or death kind of question. But what is, and this is a free discussion. We have the microphones, Ryan? So I just want to say, we do want people who are participating in the discussion in our sanctuary to use the microphone so that people who are joining us on live stream can actually hear your insights, because they will not hear them if you don't speak into the microphone. And again, I will invite those who are only joining us online that if you have other insights you wish to share and you want to add commentary to the Facebook or YouTube, that as long as it's in English, because there's been all this commentary in German on our YouTube page, so I got to figure that out. So I'll ask for someone to translate it, probably Google. So please comment in English. I'm happy to participate in an English commentary and discussion on our YouTube or Facebook page. You're welcome to offer something afterwards too, but I would prefer if we participated now. So what is the measure of friendship? How far should someone be willing to go for the sake of a friend? And is friendship even more important than, let's frame it this way, than the rules of and laws of the land? Whether they're just or not, that's another question. And is it friendship more important than familial bonds? And that's the setup. And so you're welcome to weigh in and offer insight here and questions or responses. Hey, Rabbi Moskowitz, what do you think? I don't know. So let's go ahead. Don't make me discuss with myself, please.
Well, I think this illustrates something that it's pretty unique to be able to set aside, in this case, the meaning of a family member and their welfare and what they desire for a friend takes a lot. I think that's a big issue. Because we ultimately are brought up to respect our family and people in our family. We have tight families. I'm assuming Jonathan and Saul were tight for a while before all this.
It certainly seems that way, right?
No falling out. But there's a certain issue about certain friendships, and it's very rare to find, I think, but there's a certain emotional intimacy that occurs. And I think what this story is illustrating, which is interesting, is that it's an emotional intimacy that develops between two people that sometimes is so powerful that it's very difficult for you to see, for one to see any other way but then to be loyal to this other person. I think also Jonathan probably saw that his father was, his reasons for he was jealous. Jealousy is not a good thing. He was also at risk of losing the lineage of the kingship, so to speak, to someone who was not part of his family, and therefore that's an issue as well. But I think Jonathan realized that his father was dealing with those jealousy issues more than anything else, where David was indeed a champion of the people in many, many ways. So I think that logic on Jonathan's behalf, in addition to what he found, which is I don't think many people find in other people. I think there's a certain, I use that word intimacy, because I think that a lot of us are shy back from that sometimes in many different ways for some reason, and I don't know why. But I think if we did and opened up our hearts and our minds to that, maybe we'd be a little bit more, we'd feel freer. But I think that's the thing. I think there was a certain issue between them that really made him click that way.
I just want to highlight two things and reflect back a little bit what you offered, which is that, so maybe this friendship is on a different level. And so we're not just talking about all friends. There might be one or maybe even two friends where this is sort of that next level friendship. I don't know how else to call it. And there is absolutely intimacy suggested. It says that they loved each other and their souls were bound up together. So the Bible is certainly indicating that this friendship is not just any friendship. And also a really important point is that Jonathan maybe thinks his father is not making rational decisions, which the text is telling us he's not. He might be doing normal king stuff, but that's not how people should behave. Now, just as sidebar, before we go back to our discussion, one of the things that the Bible does, and any great literature, is that the narrative runs counter sort of against the rules. Right? So in other words, it's David's not supposed to get the kingship. He's not next in line technically. And so there's all of sort of that's what makes that sort of creative tension in the text makes for it, I want to keep reading. What happens? How's this going to get resolved? So that's part of what makes any good book or literature like the Bible and offers it to us. So another insight.
Is this working? Not so much an insight, but a question. Jonathan would have been the natural heir to the throne.
I forgot in terms of the order, but yeah, he is sort of giving up his place. And all of this, Jonathan's not the only son who's killed in battle. They're all killed in battle ultimately.
But why wasn't Jonathan interested in being king?
Well, that's so his love seems to override his. So the thing it also suggests is Jonathan's, at least this is how I read it. So Jonathan sees in David, the natural leader. It's sort of like, okay, maybe this guy is who the natural leader is. He's successful at every battle. And so that's why I think Jonathan is willing to step aside or serve David in terms of what he sees as, God's mission, that David should be the ruler as opposed to Saul. So I believe that's what's going on there, and that's part of the text seems to suggest that Jonathan is agrees with that and shares that insight that David is meant for the job more than anyone else, or meant for the moment, however you want to read it.
So as I was reading this, I just heard The Godfather in my head. It just seemed very, very Godfathery.
You mean how Saul's behaving?
Yeah, I'm going to kill him. He's not good for this. Is not good. He's trying to take over. I'm going to get him killed. And Jonathan saying, "Dad, he's good for business. He's winning everything. It's cool, But there's very much an element of business here. But what I'm taking, so to that extent, I kind of didn't relate to this personally, except that my takeaway is that a good friend stands up for their friend, and if you know that something bad is being said, you stand up to the people who are saying something. I do have a friend who has siblings who are being absolutely awful, and I would not pick up the phone and call them. However, if confronted, I might not be able to shut my mouth, but I do stand up for my friend.
I think that's a really interesting point that you raise in terms of a metric of friendship, that a measure is standing up for a friend, especially when they're facing difficulty or challenge or, I mean, I don't want to put these words in your mouth, but abuse, you know, and then so, which you could, I mean, Saul tried to kill him. That seems pretty abusive. So it's not a stretch. So friends really stand in and say, you know, I'm going to have your back. Yeah, and I'm going to be there. When I'm going to be there when no one else seems to be willing to be there, especially those who you might expect or should be there. Where's the microphone? Oh, go ahead. Oh, you're just passing it?
Oh. I ended up with the microphone.
Oh,
But
now you're speaking.
But now I'm speaking.
Thank you for participating.
I was thinking things, so now I'll just say them out loud.
That's
there
the
you
point
go.
of the microphone.
Okay. So I was thinking about that we're not talking about the rules of the country. So we have all these feelings of good friends, and it's reminiscent of things that have happened in our recent history where you believe in something so much and you think you're right and you independently feel you're right, and maybe you're supporting your best friend or your closest friend. But what about the rules that surround us? So we can't, neglect even talking about that, because otherwise you're standalone taking over the country. And I don't know, I'm just posing that. I don't know what's right or wrong.
Yeah, so well, this story would suggest that friendship is what wins the day. That the friendship is the final say, and that the other rules, like the rules and and family, take second to friendship. Now, we're looking at an episode, so I don't think that should be how we run our lives all the time. I'm not suggesting that. So the larger question might be, in what circumstances is that true? In what moment do you say, okay, I'm standing by my friend, even though my mom and dad are saying something different? I'm just putting it sort of like into our more contemporary language. I can't imagine be every situation, and thank God we're not facing life and death and spears thrown at us, but friendship is extraordinarily important and a value that we have. Now, we don't know what Jonathan and David's conversation were only about sort of how Saul's behaving. We don't know what they were like, what were they talking about in private? What were they sharing with each other? David certainly gets, he starts to lose a great deal of his humility once he becomes king as well. And so that just sort of, you could say that that's sort of what goes with kings and queens, and that they lose that sense. So pass that mic. Thank you for the participation.
Thank you. I don't know the story intimately, and so based on what I've heard today, what struck me was that Saul tried to buy David off by saying, "Here, take my oldest daughter."
Right.
And then we don't hear anything.
Well,
about,
I edited, so
or at least here, what is their relationship? I don't know any more than that. So that, to me, I'll buy you off with that. Then,
well, actually, can I just add something?
Yeah.
So Saul gives, first of all, unfortunately, in the Bible and women did not have a say in marriage. She was property that was given by the king to David as a token, if you will. She becomes, he has many wives. And so, but what's really remarkable is Saul doesn't care at all about her feelings, because the next line is like, okay, I'm going to send him at the front of the troops so he gets killed. Yeah. Like, which kind of unbelievable. Like, so you're really, that's pretty self-absorbed, Saul. Like, not even to worry about your daughter's feelings or her stake in this relationship.
So what that said to me is that Saul is not such a hot father, and he'll send, Jonathan, his son. Like, his children don't matter to him in the same way that, let's say, our children matter to us. And from what I've read here, we know without a doubt that Jonathan is very much in love with David in probably many different dimensions. However, I don't read anything about how David feels about this. In other words, is David just instrumental in the relationship?
Not until
and
the
Jonathan
conclusion when
affective?
we read when Jonathan dies, right? That concluding for that one verse, I grieve for you, my brother, you are most dear to me. So we get, that's the
but-
little bit we get.
But we know he feels bad because he knows what Jonathan did for him. But and he appreciates the actions, which really were, I would say, heroic given, what's going on. But was he emotionally affected as well beyond the instrumental? Like, gee, thanks for doing that for me, but, I got to move on. So I'm just wondering.
He, at this point in his sort of, growing, there's more feelings of David than when he becomes king. It's sort of like, there's almost this sense that once they become king, they kind of lose that affection and feeling, and everything becomes sort of utilitarian. Like, this is the purpose of this relationship or this marriage is for political gain. So that's an unfortunate, it's a theme in history. I don't need to
say, I read all of these stories as moral messages. And so for me, the moral message is that you have to be loyal to your friends. That's what should be
so
the
then the
takeaway.
question is, what is the limit? No. So this is exactly, it clearly you have to be loyal to friend. But what is the limit of loyalty? Where does it begin and where does it end? And what is, so where, and I would like, maybe it's the one or two. So if we just want to talk about the one or two sort of like best friends, is there any limit? If this is the person who you are most attached to as a friend, is there, like in this case, absolutely no limit to the ends that you will go for the sake of that friend? Or are there?
So I just respectfully disagree with the conversation about it being friend versus family, because the way it seems to me is Jonathan actually supplants his feelings of friendship or loving. David becomes his either father or brother.
Right.
So
he
it's
refers
not
to him as brother. Yeah.
friend over family. It's all family, and family first, and as deep as it goes. His loyalty is to the kind, I feel like he's not choosing a friend. He's still staying in the family. He's just going where he feels the strength is and the kindness is, and going away from the abuse portion.
That's a really nice disagreement, but I appreciate that correction. That is that he sees him as his brother, so that's family. And so when a friend is, and sort of that's if I understand the thinking, when a friend becomes family, then that's where you go to all ends. Very nice. Okay, Talia, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, I kind of disagree with...
Oh, okay. All right, well, that's going to be an interesting lunch at their house.
Because I'd say that he doesn't think of him as his family, but it's just... I guess he thinks of him as his family, but in the end, it's not his family, it's his friend. And sometimes you have to choose your friend over your family if, say, your family is not good to you or not as important to you, and your friend is more of a family than your own family. So it's not that he's part of his family, per se, it's just that he's a better person than his actual family.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Sally, can you just jump up and hand the mic down?
I think you hit it on the head. I think the most basic thing, can be summarized in the expression, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. And we've all faced that. We're loyal to family, sometimes to a fault, because they're family, we know they're wrong, but at the end, you should do what's right. And as I say, we're all faced with that, especially in these political times where you can't even go to family functions and talk politics anymore and things like that because, the differences are so great. But you align yourself with friends who you do have a choice of.
Well, I think many friendships face a similar dynamic today as family does.
But
So-
you're not married to them, and you can leave them.
Oh, you can. You're saying you can.
I don't mean marry.
Okay, we'll schedule an appointment. Okay, and so.
I was just going to say the same thing. Basically, what's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. And Jonathan saw something that was wrong, whether it's your father, whether it's your friend, whether it's your enemy. If they're doing something right, you have to support it. If they're doing something wrong, you have to speak up.
Okay, so I like that. So the idea is that he has a clear sense of right and wrong, and that's actually what's guiding it. It's not
That's
necessarily friendship or family. It's the sense of what's true and false and right and wrong and good and evil, and that's what's steering him in the right direction. Okay, that's good. Okay, one or two more comments. Back row. Oh.
I personally don't think it's so cut and dry when it comes to these things. When it comes to these things, I hear you say, like, at what degree do you go to protect a friend, and how far will you go? And it makes me think of, like, shifting a little bit as a parent. How far do you go for your child if they commit a crime, if they commit murder, if they do something and you know about it? Do you turn them in? Do you protect them? It's all sort of in the same category to me, that it just can't be so cut and dry. And you know your child did wrong, but are you willing to turn them in?
Yeah, no, I don't think anything is ever so cut and dry or so clear cut. That's why we're spending time discussing it and trying to just figure out some basic strategies. One more comment? Thank you.
I want to go back to what you said about the lengths that you'd go to, and you pointed out that it's more of a rarity that we're going to have a couple of friends on the level that Jonathan and David were on, and I feel very, very blessed that I have a couple of those friends. And I start to look at my kids and ask myself if they've got friends like that or relationships like that yet. And they're in their 20s, so have they formed those friendships? And I've seen them rally around friends in need and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful that that's the case. But the couple of relationships I have, I mean, I would go to war for those friends, and they would do the same for me. And I hope my kids and our next generation develops friendships on that level too.
Excellent. All right, just let me offer, I really appreciate people participating in our discussion, and I want to just offer a concluding thought. First of all, this is obviously not a simple question, and there's many permutations and many difficulties where we might make different choices. What is so extraordinary about the choice here is that, Jonathan does in some ways the unexpected thing for whatever reason. He chooses the friend over his father, which is, surprising and unexpected and extraordinary, and maybe even in the end at the cost of his own life in terms of for the sake of his friendship and David. The rabbis had a phrase. They said, "Kanei lecha chaver," which means literally acquire for yourself a friend. But the sense is that it's an active pursuit, right? You can't just, it's not just going to come to you. You're not going to just get it. They're going to show up at your doorstep. Best friends, that's it, we're done. I mean, it's something that you have to constantly nurture and work on, you know, so that so that you might be blessed with, you know, a friend or two that you feel so devoted to, as David and Jonathan felt devoted to each other. Even though we do, in honesty, have more of Jonathan's feelings than David's, that you would have that sense of loyalty is an extraordinary blessing, and that sense of intimacy between two people that you're like, that's it, they need me, sorry, I got to go. Whatever it is, that is an extraordinary thing. And the rabbi's message is that requires work and nurture. It's not just going to come and show up at your doorstep. It's something that has to be tended to and worked on a regular basis. That is the greatest lesson about friendship. And so I hope we've gained some insights for our own lives, for our relationships with family and friends from the stories in the Bible. And that is, in the end, why we read them. We want to find some meaning and inspiration so that we can kind of go out into this complicated and broken world and figure out how to do better and lead our lives in even more profound and meaningful ways. Thank you again for your participation.